Hello, everyone. You've got Paula here, and I encourage you just to get settled. I just have a few thoughts and an announcement to share before we begin today's presentation at the top of the hour. I want to let you know about our last webinar. Well, it was on March 21st, and we had Hawthorn faculty member Dr. Bianca Grilli, and she was presenting on the topic of nature, the ultimate gene whisperer. I was so inspired by this presentation. Bianca is an excellent teacher, so I hope you check it out. It's a terrific information. We talk a lot about the importance of eating whole foods and eating them seasonally. And this presentation really takes seasonal eating and seasonal food choices to another whole level and pairs it with the concepts within nutrigenomics and epigenetics. And it's just brilliant, the research that is emerging in this that's come forward. So it's just a very well put presentation. I hope you take a look at it. Again, that was on March 21st, and you can find this on our website now under archived webinars. And there's a number of other ones up there too to check out, but this one in particular. I also want to let you know about another series that we're doing, another online series. It's our All About Alumni series, and it's a 30-minute live online event. And it's an opportunity that we take to showcase Hawthorn's graduates. And they are going to share the successes that they're seeing and the challenges that they're facing and what they've learned from these and share it with the rest of us. So I think it's a great opportunity to hear the variety of different things that our graduates are immersing themselves in and opportunities that are available to them and that they're forging these new paths. And it's also an opportunity for you to be able to speak to and ask the graduates directly about their experiences while they were in school at Hawthorn and how they're setting up their businesses now. So these presentations air at noon Pacific time on the first Wednesday of each month. So I hope you'll tune in with us live tomorrow, actually, Wednesday, April 5th at noon Pacific time, to hear our doctoral graduate, Vicki Stein, share about her journey. And just a reminder that we've recorded all of our webinars and our All About Alumni events, and we'll record this one today too as well, so you have access them from our website anytime under archived webinars. We'll also have a survey for you to complete after the webinar ends. And again, this is an opportunity for you to give us feedback on this presentation and to let us know what you'd like to learn more about in upcoming webinars. I don't know that there's a specific slot there about what you'd like to learn more about, but I'd like to hear about that because we're producing these webinars for you, for your benefit. There's no charge for these, and we're dedicated to keeping it that way. We bring in the best presenters we can from around the country and to focus on specific topics that we think will help you as students and as graduates and the work that you're doing professionally. So here's an example where we have Glen Depke back today from Depke Wellness, and Glen has been a featured presenter for us over the last several years, and it's been so well received. I really always appreciate Glen's style of presentation, so accessible, so well organized, and you'll find that in general. So please let us hear from you about what you'd like and how we can serve your educational needs. Always interested in that. All right, I think that's about all that. Oh, I wanted to talk just a little bit about the National Association of Nutritional Professionals. They've got their annual meeting. It's going to be in Portland this year, and it's later this month. I'm sorry I don't have the exact dates right in front of me, but you can check them out at namp.org. And it's a member organization. They're working with both students while you're in school, as well as post-graduation as you're emerging professionals and those that are well steeped as professionals in the whole holistic health field and focusing on health and nutrition to join as members and avail themselves of their services. They also offer through their sister organization, the Holistic Nutrition Credentialing Board, they offer a board exam, and graduates of Hawthorn are qualified for most of our programs are qualified to sit for that board exam, and upon successful completion of it are granted the status of being board certified in holistic nutrition. Another well-earned and deserved certification when you go through the process for it. So check them out, both for what they have to offer in their annual conference, the general support services, and they're just terrific in terms of monitoring legislation and really being on point of making a difference and making a stand when necessary. One example is the ongoing threat to the availability and use of nutritional supplementations in our practice, and being able to buy them over the counter and from professional resources wholesale. So it's something we've been battling for years, that we've been able to maintain access to, but that is always threatened, and I can thank NANP for their dedication to this over the long term. So that's about it for me in terms of updates and news and notes and things. And so I want to turn my attention to the presentation at hand here. So I see a number of people continuing to join us. I'm pleased, and I want to welcome you all to Hawthorn University's webinar series, and thank you for joining in. I'm Paula Bartholomew, and it's my pleasure to be the moderator today. I want to let you know we'll save time at the end of this presentation for your questions. So at any point, and sooner the better, just add your questions or your comments to the webinar panel, and I'll pose them for each of you at the end of Glen's presentation. Okay, today Hawthorn University welcomes back Glen Depke to discuss gut bugs? No, gut infections, the source of gastrointestinal, brain, and immune issues. So in this webinar, we're all going to learn a little bit more about the various type of infections that can affect us in our guts, and what the potential is for contracting them and the symptoms that they provoke, and certainly the proper steps so we can successfully overcome and eliminate them naturally. A little bit about Glen. He holds degrees as a traditional naturopath. He has a BA in Sciences and Natural Health and a diploma in Professional Holistic Iridology. Glen's become known as a master in adrenal insufficiency, gluten intolerance, functional healing, and customized nutrition, and he champions the wonderful Depke Wellness Clinic. It's a pleasure to have Glen back with us. Thank you for being here again, Glen.
Oh, absolutely. It is my pleasure. It's just such a joy to be a part of the Hawthorn family, and everything's always so well received. It's just it really all starts at the top with you, Paula, and works on down. So I'm grateful to be here.
Well, you see it as the top of me from on down, but you know, I'm small on the totem pole here. But thank you for the recognition, Glen.
Absolutely.
All right, it's in your hands now. I'm going to let you start your presentation.
Excellent, thank you. So I love what Paula had mentioned really quickly, where she said the gut bugs. You know, that's really what we're dealing with, and we're going to look and talk in depth today about gut infections, and I'm going to help you understand basically how these are often, and more often than we may think, the source of not only gut, but also brain, immune issues. And we're going to touch on a few other bases today as we go through this presentation. Before we get into this, I really always like to start by thanking Hawthorn University. It's just the level of expertise that they provide for all of us, myself included, is just enormous on a regular basis, and I cannot thank them enough. And it's such a pleasure for the Depke Wellness Center to join in a partnership and to really be a part of the Hawthorn family. So once again, thank you so much to Hawthorn for all of us. So today, I want to first lay out a little bit of what we're going to address together. We are going to talk first about some common types of gut infections. You know, there's many different infections that can actually challenge us. So we're going to talk about many of these that I commonly see on a regular basis with clients. We're going to talk about the potential for contracting these infections, which is something that is very often surprising to people when they hear about this. We're going to discuss the symptoms that these can create. And just as a little bit of a tidbit with this is that very often the symptoms that we would experience aren't necessarily are not necessarily what we think we would experience from a gut infection. So we're going to talk in depth on that level. We're going to discuss, and this one is always amazing, is how long people are generally living with infections prior to a recognition, and you're going to be really surprised when we get to this later in the presentation. And of course, we want to discuss and talk about the proper steps to overcome and eliminate these, not only naturally, but also successfully. So the first question is, just think for yourself, do you have any of these symptoms? And this is where, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Are you really depleted throughout your day? Is there high level fatigue? Do you feel that you're chronically fatigued on a regular basis? Are you dealing with some level of gut discomfort, whether you're bloated, or are you being led to feelings of constipation or loose stool or diarrhea or any type of a gastrointestinal distress? Are you led down a path to be feeling pain in your body? Or do you recognize that there's any level of sensitivities? And it's not just about food sensitivities. Are you somebody who's living with some level of a multiple chemical sensitivity? Or perhaps you have chronic sinus issues, or maybe your brain just isn't functioning the way you would like it to. Maybe the regulation of mood is a challenge, or maybe comprehension or memory. You pick up your phone, you don't remember who you were dialing it to, you walk into a room and forget why you go in there. Or perhaps you're just getting sick often and you're not understanding why this is happening to you. Or maybe you're somebody who's eating a diet that is high in sugar, processed carbohydrates, dairy products, which can be an issue for many people. And it's basically, we're looking at all the different challenges that people would actually have. And as this all relates into, I had mentioned the chemical sensitivity, but also, are you having troubles with food sensitivity? So these are all the symptoms that people can actually be living with when they're dealing with these chronic gut infections. And here's the big challenge, number one. From a conventional medical perspective, they're often questioning what's causing your issue and never really getting basically to the bottom of this. And very often, the missing piece of the puzzle for what you're suffering with is tied directly into gut infections. And I have a clinical example here. And this was just a client that I saw recently, just a number of weeks ago, who has had this long-term gut challenge that this gentleman has seen every expert in the Southern California area from a conventional medical perspective. And every time he accomplishes and ends that session, he basically walks away with the thought process, because of what the doctor tells him, that everything is okay with your gut. We don't know what's going on, but that's so frustrating to this. It was so frustrating to this gentleman because he knew something wasn't right with his gut. So when he's being told by his conventional physician that everything is okay, there was a level of not only frustration, by the time he actually was in our center, there was a level of hopelessness that this gentleman was feeling. And the interesting aspect of this is to me, it seemed very obvious that the gut infections were likely one of the challenges. And we did a stool collection kit, and lo and behold, he not only had a gut infection, this particular gentleman had 4 infections. He was dealing with a yeast overgrowth, a blastocystis hominis, which is a parasitic protozoa, also an H. pylori infection, and an abundant overgrowth of E. coli. And so to me, that was a simple understanding of what was driving his gut challenges. But again, through seeing many experts over many years, nobody was able to really understand what was going on with this gentleman from a gut infection standpoint. So you want to talk about a missing piece of the puzzle. That was very significant for him, as it could be for yourself also. And really what we're doing here is we're looking at these little, and that's why I was kind of chuckling when Paula said, the gut bugs, because that's really what this picture is actually presenting for us. And it's something that is very often, if not most often, overlooked. And when we think of the gut infections and parasites, and from more of a Greek origin, the parasitos, which actually is transcribed into alongside food, And while this may have had a different meaning, when this was actually formulated, now we can recognize, and we're going to talk about this later, how very common it is for us to actually be exposed to and potentially contract parasites along with food consumption. And you're going to be surprised later on the levels at which I'm going to talk about this. So I'm very excited to share that with you in just a bit. So we're going to start by looking at some of the different gut infections that I commonly see with clients on a regular basis. Different forms of protozoa or amoeba. I had mentioned earlier that the Blastocystis hominis, which is a protozoal parasite, and I've seen people contracted with amoeba or entamoebas and many different infections on this level. Also, roundworm is very common. And roundworm, as you're going to learn later, can not only be tied into what's going on with your gut, but can be tied into other areas of pain with your joints in your body. So the roundworm is also very common. Tapeworm is also very common and very well often just misunderstood as to what we're really doing with the tapeworm, and the tapeworm also can be a little bit more difficult to address. So if you actually do get an assessment that says that you have tapeworm, it's something that you want to look at a little bit more long term. And flukes are another big issue, not only for the gut, but very often I see people who are challenged with bloating where the flukes aren't just in the gastrointestinal system, but very often there's liver flukes. And when there's liver flukes, they're much more difficult to get rid of and to address properly, because it's harder to utilize the supplementation into the liver specifically rather than the gut. And another significant challenge for not only the gastrointestinal system, but also the liver along with this. And the detrimental bacteria. I want to give some different examples of bacteria that I see as relatively common when I'm actually looking at these stool collection assessments that come back to us. And I'm gonna really focus on 4 of the bacteria. The first one I want to really talk about is an H. pylori infection. And I'm going to bring up H. pylori first because this one is a little bit different as far as how it resides in the body. Because H. pylori infection basically resides in the stomach. And when you're dealing with an H. pylori infection, this very often creates symptoms that are tied into low stomach acid, so it can actually hinder your ability to break down protein as well as minerals and B vitamins. One of the little side notes that I'll make with this is not just with H. pylori, and I'm going to say the H. pylori specifically because it has such a big impact on protein breakdown. But any of these different gut infections that you're going to potentially be exposed to and live with over time, any of these can actually create an incident where you don't break down protein well. And as a little side note for that, to potentially just make a note for yourself, is that for all the people that are dealing with food sensitivity on a consistent basis, whether it be a gluten sensitivity or cross-reactive sensitivities or any other type of food sensitivity, at the core of that is an inability to break down protein. So that's why when I had mentioned earlier, if you're dealing with these multiple chemical sensitivities or these food sensitivities, the food sensitivities specifically are going to be tied into that lack of protein breakdown. So if you're somebody who's dealing with a gluten sensitivity as well as many other cross-reactive sensitivities, maybe dairy and eggs or rice or whatever it may be, and maybe you've even done a very comprehensive assessment and you have 50 different foods that you know that you're sensitive to, maybe even things like avocado or broccoli or these foods that you wouldn't normally suspect you'd have a sensitivity to. It's driven by this lack of proper protein breakdown that's typically caused by whether it be H. pylori or any of these other infections. Now, with the H. pylori specifically, why I want to bring this up a little bit differently, because later on we're going to talk about how we contract these. Well, the H. pylori itself resides in the stomach, So this is the one pathogen out of all of these I'm going to talk about, the one infection that is much more easily really passed on from one person to the next, because this can be passed through saliva. So sharing of a bottle of water or a glass of tea or kissing your loved one, because it resides in the stomach, if you belch and that belch actually brings up some of the H. pylori and it mixes with your saliva, it's very easy to actually share this or have this shared from another person. And now, a few other bacteria that I think are important to address. One is Klebsiella. Klebsiella is a tricky bacteria to deal with because it doesn't just affect the gastrointestinal system, but Klebsiella can also migrate into the respiratory system, and you can actually contract something that is known as a Klebsiella pneumonia, where you're going to actually have inflammation in your respiratory system specifically from the Klebsiella. So that's another one that if you're dealing with that, you want to not only make sure that you're doing something to support your immune system function of overcoming the Klebsiella in the gut, but also with the respiratory system. Right? Another bacteria that I'll bring up is something called Enterobacter, which is a nasty little bug because the Enterobacter has a very high occurrence of being antibiotic resistant. And so very often when people are challenged with some of these different bacteria and they're using the antibiotics because that would be the conventionally prescribed way to go, but something like the Enterobacter doesn't respond well to the antibiotics, which is then going to be a significant issue for us. And the last detrimental bacteria I want to bring up, and this one is so important to bring up because it's often really mistaken as far as how this is being viewed and addressed by natural health practitioners, and it's E. coli. And the reason why I bring this up is because, number one, most of us are going to understand that E. coli does play a role in a healthy digestive system, but in a certain amount of E. coli that's in a proper ratio and a proper partnership with the good bacteria in the gut. And the problem comes in is that, and I see this often with clients where they'll have E. coli and the E. coli will be graded as and in the system, in the testing I'm looking at, they grade it by a number scale. So it's a 1, 2, 3, or 4 for the overgrowth. 1 and 2 is low, 3 is moderate, and 4 is abundant. And I very often see clients in my center that actually have an abundant overgrowth of E. coli, and yet other practitioners might look at that and say, oh, well, we don't have to worry about the E. coli because that's normal for your digestive system. But and while it is normal for a lower level of E. coli, not in an abundant overgrowth, because the E. coli itself can create so many different challenges, not only with gastrointestinal system, but the E. coli can even lead to a form of arthritis. It can lead to a syndrome that ties into really a dysregulation of the capillary circulation in your body, which is important for about 75% of your body's circulation. But E. coli also easily migrates into the kidneys, the bladder, and the urinary tract. So anybody who's dealing with any long-term bladder infections or UTIs or kidney infections, it could be the migration of E. coli from the GI into that area, and it can migrate back. So that's another area when, if E. coli is something that you're assessed as actually challenged with, you want to deal with it not only in the gut, but also something to help support what you're doing with basically the kidneys, the bladder, and the urinary tract. And here's the other tricky thing as far as the bacteria are concerned. And it's so interesting from a bacterial perspective because years ago, it was recognized as we would look through microscopes that bacteria typically were more like these little stealth fighters where they would just go out and they would do their own destruction on a one-on-one basis. But what's been really interesting now is these bacteria, as time is going on, they are evolving. And because their lifespan is so short, they evolve much quicker than we do as human beings. So very often they're ahead of the game with us. And what's now recognized with bacteria is rather than them going out and doing destruction and doing everything on their own as individuals, they have now figured out that they work better in community. So now what we see with bacteria is they form communities, and then around the community they form a biofilm, which is almost like it's basically a protective barrier that plays a huge role in why there's so many antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and also why you can even use some natural therapies unsuccessfully because of the biofilm. And as we get into this later in the presentation, I'm going to be talking also about what you can actually do to actually help yourself and help your body and your immune system in breaking down that biofilm so you can have success in overcoming whatever type of bacteria you may be living with at this moment. And it really comes back to, as mentioned before, parasites are really suspected. And you think about it, people think that parasitic infections or these gut infections are like third world country problems. But that's not the case. These are parasites, and these gut infections are just as relevant here in the US as they would be really anywhere else in the world, and we're all exposed on a consistent basis. And it's not just the parasites and how it affects the digestive system. And that's an important factor, though. We don't want to ignore that, but let's just look at it from the most obvious, is that when you have a parasitic infection, any kind of a gut infection, number one, it's going to affect your gastrointestinal system, and it's going to hinder your ability to digest your food properly. I can't tell you, I've seen countless clients through the years who have a very high level of nutritional integrity, yet they're still malnourished. But very often they're still malnourished because they just simply don't know that they're living with this significant infection. And beyond then the digestive aspect, we want to pay attention then to how this affects the immune system. And then really kind of it's almost like the chicken or the egg story, right? Because approximately 70 to 80% of your immune system originates in the gastrointestinal system. So if you have an infection, and that's actually affecting what's going on in your gut, and it's affecting how your body breaks down and uses nutrients, all of that is going to lead you down a path to what I would generally consider immune system dysregulation or a weakened immune system. And then guess what? When you have a weakened immune system, what do you think you're more susceptible to picking up? And if you're guessing another gut infection, that is the case. That's why so many people get caught in this cycle, and it's almost like running the hamster wheel. And the faster you run, you think you're getting out of it, but you're not really moving anywhere. Because you're always being bombarded, and then as the immune system weakens, you're just more susceptible, and you end up being the perfect environment for the next infection that comes your way. And we also want to recognize how the gut infections really affect the gut-brain connection. We're talking about digestion and breaking down nutrients, and we talked earlier about breaking down protein and the importance of that on so many levels. But we can't ignore the entire gut-brain connection, because when there's a problem with your gut, there is a problem with your brain. And we know this, and we know that this is an interconnected system, because 90% of the brain output goes right down the vagus nerve, through the spinal column, into the nervous system tissue in the gut, and comes right back up. So this is very often why when people are dealing with gut infections, even if you're not symptomatic in your gut specifically, this could be leading to, as mentioned earlier in the presentation, this could be a lack of proper mental clarity. You might be thinking of it as brain fog. It could be affecting your memory, your comprehension. It could be affecting your mood. It could be affecting anything that's tied into brain function because of this connection. So don't think of it, and don't think of it only as a gut issue. And I have a short little story about that with a client from a few years ago that I was working with, and we were first working on stress hormones and balancing that level, and we really weren't seeing I wasn't seeing the results that I'm normally seeing with clients. And this particular woman was sharing some symptoms that she was feeling from a brain perspective. And I told her, I says, I really think I really suspect that you're living with some type of gut infection. And she was almost borderline argumentative about this because she never had a gut symptom. She said, I have perfect bowel movements, twice per day, as you always say I should. I don't ever get bloated. I don't ever feel any gut discomfort. And I was finally able to, help her see how the gut infections could be manifesting as a brain issue. And sure enough, she did the stool kit. We tested for what was going on, and she not only had a infection, she had 2 infections. She was dealing with a parasite and some form of bacteria at the same time. And again, this is a person who it was really, the symptoms were more brain derived than they were gut derived. So just recognize the impact that it has on this as a whole system. And other challenges that can be created by these different infections. Inflammation is a big one, because when you're dealing with an infection, there's going to be a chronic inflammatory state in your GI that's going to go along with that, because the inflammation itself is actually a part of a natural healing crisis, except when you're to the point where you've got this overload of population of an infection that has now weakened your immune system and weakened your adrenals, which we're going to talk about shortly. Well, then guess what? The inflammation isn't going away because the healing crisis is never really, reaching its full potential and reaching the end to where your immune system is destroying the actual pathogen or infection you're dealing with. Now, and then because there's inflammatory receptors throughout your body, when you start by dealing with initially the gut infection, you may end up with chronic systemic inflammation, which is then, it can actually create any level of pain throughout your body. So again, it's not just the picture on the lower right where you're feeling all of the discomfort in your gut. The pain could actually be anywhere in your body that as you're dealing with this chronic inflammation derived from the infections themselves. And then also the picture on the lower left on this is where it has the adrenal glands. Those are significantly impacted because when you're dealing with the chronic inflammation, then your adrenal glands, which is where we're going to be producing our stress hormones, and some of you may have heard one of the past webinars I did on adrenals and recognize that primary stress hormone is cortisol. But what most aren't completely aware of is that the cortisol production cortisol is converted into cortisone, and the cortisone is your body's natural anti-inflammatory. So if you're dealing with a gut infection and the gut infection is actually creating this inflammation, now your adrenal glands have to produce all this cortisol to help produce the cortisone to try to keep up with this natural anti-inflammatory aspect of your body. And you know what makes this tough? I mean, we all have enough other stressors going on. We don't need the chronic inflammation from the infections really wearing out the adrenals, because the adrenals, they basically, those 2 tiny little glands will have an effect on the whole of your body. And again, all of these different areas are driven by the gut infections, leading to the chronic inflammation and the other symptoms and challenges with other areas in your body. And also, to recognize that the parasitic and infections, so these gut infections, can actually mimic other diseases. So somebody that's actually going to be diagnosed by their conventional doctor with a peptic ulcer, it could be a roundworm infection. Or remember, I'd mentioned earlier, roundworms tied into arthritic conditions. Arthritis could actually be roundworm cysts in the joints of your body. Or chronic fatigue syndrome. Very often it's chronic giardia. And giardia, we're going to see later, is something that is somewhat relatively common in our water sources. And very often hypoglycemia or diabetes could actually simply be a tapeworm. And so I really just want you to recognize that, when we have a diagnosis and a name is put to something, we always want to look deeper as to, well, what actually causes this for us? What's at the core of what's really going on? And as you can tell by what we're talking about, typically gut infections have a significant deep core when we're talking about different disease states and chronic challenges that we're living with on a regular basis. Now, some different symptoms as would just be tied into your gastrointestinal system and your intestines. If you have gut infections that you're dealing with, any of these symptoms could actually be expressed in your body on a consistent basis. So flatulence, constipation, or diarrhea. And the constipation, just to define a couple of these here, the constipation, it doesn't mean that you're not having a bowel movement, but maybe they're smaller, like little balls of what your bowel movement would be, or very difficult to pass and slow and hard. So think of constipation as not just not having a bowel movement. And also diarrhea. So and it could be anywhere from just a relatively loose stool to a watery stool and anywhere in between. Other symptoms of what's going on with infection, I mentioned malnutrition, and this could be somebody who's eating excellent all the time. You could be eating organic and free range and wild caught and getting the best of everything, but still be malnourished because you can't break down those nutrients properly. You can't pull out the vitamins, minerals, the enzymes, the coenzymes, all these different factors of what you're looking for from your food. Other symptoms of infection, leaky gut, which could easily be referred to as leaky small intestines, because that's a little bit more realistic of what it is. And so people that are diagnosed or assessed as a leaky gut condition. Food sensitivities, I mentioned that earlier. And typically, and again, remember, typically the food sensitivities are driven by a lack of proper protein breakdown, which is then allowing the antigens to, these immune system antigens, to actually attach to these amino acid chains because they're not properly broken down. Other symptoms of the infections would be fatigue, depression, anxiety. And we think about this, depression and anxiety. Who's thinking gut infection, right? But most of the time, if you're dealing with depression and anxiety, you go down a conventional route, you're going to be written a prescription for an antidepressant. I was joking with Paula before the event started today, and we were talking about people being put on antidepressants, and I was saying, I said, well, nobody ever has a deficiency in Wellbutrin. So it's again, we want to get to what's causing the anxiety and depression. And another symptom would be poor memory. But then it's not just those symptoms. Symptoms can be actually occurring elsewhere in your body when you're dealing with these infections. You could be dealing with rashes or skin ulcers or overall itchy skin. Very often it could be tied into the infection itself, or how the infection is actually impacting your liver. You could have joint aches and pains. You could be dealing with cramps anywhere in your body, back pain, fatigue. I mentioned on the last slide, but I put it on here and again because the fatigue is one of those symptoms that is almost always occurring when people are dealing with gut infections. Also, muscle tension, blurry vision, chronic coughing would also be tied into this. Like as an example, very often when you have we use an example of a bacteria, where you have a bacteria, and that you might, as a part of the release of the bacteria, it'll get into the respiratory system, you'll cough it up, but then sometimes when you're coughing, some of that goes right back down the esophagus and go right back into the gut. So there's a lot of these different challenges that actually can be driven and will arise from the infections that are going on in the gut. So here's the next thing this is so important, is how do we get infected, right? And we get infected based on a lot of different avenues here. Travel, these different infections, these parasites, these protozoas, amoebas, the entamoebas, the detrimental bacteria, the H. pylori infection, all of this actually goes around the world very quickly and very easily. And basically, parasites and gut infections are delivered daily to our country and from our country. Also, many imported foods are actually carrying some different types of infections that we may be dealing with. Tap water, and I mentioned earlier Giardia, and which is relatively common in tap water, which is why I'm always suggesting to use a quality filtration system for your tap water if you're drinking from a tap. And also, sometimes the water systems themselves actually have a contamination. I think it was the city of Milwaukee. I don't remember the exact number of years ago. I think it was maybe 20 years ago or so, but there was a significant Cryptosporidium infection in their water system. So that whole area of that state was basically exposed to Cryptosporidium, which is a really nasty little protozoal parasite, because the Cryptosporidium tends to live within the interior lining of the small intestine. So it's a little bit more difficult to actually address. But yes, so the tap water can be even further than that. Swimming in freshwater lakes, you could be exposed to flukes and also other different types of parasites. Eating raw or undercooked food, and even at expensive restaurants. And I'm going to go further with this. And I say even at expensive restaurants because people in general will think that, oh, well, yeah, I eat at the highest quality places where they only have organic. Well, that's nice, but you can actually still easily be exposed to any type of a gut infection from a food source. And while this might not be the most enjoyable conversation for most, but I really want to help you understand how this can happen so easily to any one of us, is that most of these different types of infections are passed by coming in contact with stool, basically, with feces. And you would think, well, how is that really going to happen? But think about this. When even yourself, you go and you have a bowel movement, and after the bowel movement, you, of course, are cleaning yourself. And let's say in the course of cleaning yourself that a finger pushes through the tissue paper that you're using. And you don't know, but you have this like small little microscopic amount of your stool now underneath a fingernail. Now, you of course, you're going to go wash your hands after you've had a bowel movement, but really, what are the chances that everybody who's listening to this webinar, that every time you wash your hands after a bowel movement, you take a little scrub brush and scrub under your nails? And that opportunity is probably not likely for anybody, including myself, right? So that little microscopic amount of that bacteria or that parasite that may be under your nail, and then you go and handle food, or anybody handles food, you're potentially actually going to cross-contaminate. And that's the most common way, and this can happen in any restaurant, and you know what? It can happen in our own homes. Yes, so we have to be very aware of what we're doing with food and really how we're exposing ourselves. Also, we can get different infections from man's best friend, from our dog. And the number 130 is on there because there's typically about 130 different types of infections that a dog would potentially carry. And also our feline friends. There's approximately 65 or so known regular infections that they could actually carry and cross-contaminate. And then also walking barefoot in moist soil. Now, I'm all for walking barefoot. I live in the Southern California area of the United States, and I love walking barefoot myself. But that does create the risk of picking up some type of a infection that could come up through the soles of your feet, get into the blood, and eventually be in not only your gastrointestinal system, but also other areas of the body. And another big question, and this is the one that most people are really shocked about, is generally how long do people live with infections prior to recognition, to where it's actually having a physical and a functional and a physiological effect on your body. And that time frame is years and often a decade or longer. When I used to actually work on trying to figure this out, when my client would first actually contract the infection, the normal amount of time that it was generally about 11 years. And typically when people are exposed to some type of a gut infection, you might have some symptoms that are kind of brushed off at the beginning. Maybe you have a loose stool or diarrhea. Maybe you actually even vomited when you were initially contracting this, or maybe some level of bloating or general upset with your gastrointestinal system, or a heightened state of anxiety or nervousness or depression, but some type of a symptom first occurs. But then at that point, if your immune system wasn't strong enough and your adrenal function wasn't up to par, then what's going to happen is that infection that you had contracted has now an opportunity to make home. It sets up shop in your gastrointestinal tract. And then over the years and the decade or longer, it takes for that basic gut infection to start really creating challenges in the whole body. And then you end up being diagnosed with these multiple different disease states without the recognition that, wow, this all started for me about 12 years ago when I picked up that Enterobacter infection or the Cryptosporidium or the Blastocystis hominis or any of these different infections that we can actually contract on a regular basis. So recognize by the time you have the issues with the infection, you've probably had the infection for a number of years, if not a decade or longer. And the other aspect, we want to think about just common things that lower your immunity, because this is the whole key here. And this slide wasn't as much about talking about the different chemicals and pharmaceuticals and what's being sprayed on our food, and that all plays a role. But the main reason why I wanted to put this on here for you is just to recognize that the most important aspect of this is really tied into your own body's immune system function. You know, because since we're all exposed to pathogens on a pretty consistent basis, you know, on some level, what's the secret then? Well, and the secret is just having a healthy body, having healthy and balanced adrenal function, and having healthy immune system regulation. So when we are exposed to a pathogen, your body can take care of it. Your body's already designed to deal with these pathogens properly, to recognize them, to tag them basically, and to destroy them and eliminate them from the body. So a healthy body has that potential on a regular basis, but lower immunity within your body and this immune system dysregulation basically removes that ability. And as I said earlier, it makes you a very desirable environment for the different infections that you could actually come across on a regular basis. So it's important to obviously support your immune system. You know, you want to look at, you know, really you want to start by looking at the most basic, simple things, and very often it starts with dietary changes. And from the basic levels, I'm not even just going to talk about eating better, but also, you know, eating better, living better, thinking better. You know, what's going on in our mind from a stress perspective has a huge impact on our immune system. What we put into our body as far as what we're eating has a huge impact. Very often we could take different herbs or vitamins or minerals that would actually help basically support the immune system function. Lymphatic drainage support. You know, and the lymphatic drainage is really the forgotten system of detoxification. But it's very important for moving these different types of toxins and even chemical die-off from different infections out of the body. And really a great easy way to support your lymphatic drainage system is jumping on one of those little round trampolines, rebounder, jumping on that 5 minutes a day, or dry skin brushing, and aggressively dry skin brushing from the extremity of your body, always moving toward the heart. Also, to help support your immune system, anything you're doing to help with your liver actually drain and properly is actually going to be very supportive for your immune system also. Adrenal support, you know, things like vitamin B5, you know, which are just a very simple and inexpensive B vitamin that is actually at the core of all adrenal hormones that are produced. And really anything with gut repair. And we're going to talk about a little bit deeper with gut repair as we get later into the presentation. And then there's many common herbs or supplements that could be used tied into if you have gut infections. It's very common for parasites or protozoas to use either wormwood or black walnut. Oil of oregano is a great one from the perspective where it has not only some anti-parasitic effects, but also antifungal, anti-yeast, antimicrobial, and also antiviral. Mastic gum is often used when people are dealing with an H. pylori infection. Taking your own beneficial bacteria, remember your probiotics, actually increasing your amount of your bacteria, of the good bacteria, the beneficial bacteria, is definitely helpful when you're dealing with the detrimental bacteria also, because they're all fighting for the same food source. So if you can increase the numbers of the good guys, they can actually have a positive effect on you overcoming the bad guys in your gut. I bring up a particular supplement called cerulase because cerulase has within it one particular enzyme that's called serratia peptidase, which can be used to help break down the biofilm. So if you're dealing with any type of a gut infection, you can help your immune system break down that biofilm by adding something like the cerulase, or some other product that has serratia peptidase in it. And I always give one little warning and caution to any of my clients that I would recommend this to. If you're using cerulase and breaking down biofilm, you want to just be aware that you might look down at your toilet after having a bowel movement and see something that looks like a snake had shed its skin. And because while the biofilm typically breaks down in very microscopic pieces that you'll never see, sometimes a larger sheet will break off, and you'll see that actually in the bottom of your toilet. Garlic is another just general positive supplement that you can use for when you're dealing with any type of really different gut infection. A food-grade diatomaceous earth is very commonly used by a lot of different practitioners, as many feel that the diatomaceous earth, or the DE, is something that can be used for basically any kind of infection that you're dealing with in your gut. Other supplements such as clove or olive leaf extract, also very important for different types of infections. The pau d'arco, which is commonly used for yeast or candida. Also, grapeseed extract can be used for the yeast spores. Yes, because you're going to have not only the yeast but also the spores, and the spores are a little bit trickier because the spores will actually develop into the yeast itself, but the grapeseed works on the spores. Pumpkin seeds are kind of like the roto-rooter for the gastrointestinal system. So eating whole pumpkin seeds does a world of good for helping with any kind of infection and removing it from your gastrointestinal system. And last on here is something called Luvos, and I use this with some regularity with my clients who are dealing with the challenges with die-off from their infections, because that's the one thing that you can't get away from. When you have a gut infection, there's going to be a certain level of die-off, chemical die-off you're going to be dealing with, and very often if this can get into your blood, whether through the small intestines or the large intestine or the colon, that can actually then create some symptoms. You could have headaches or body aches or pains or get fatigued. Well, Luvos is a particular clay from a mountain region of Germany that is the most absorptive material on Earth. It absorbs more per its weight as compared to what it can absorb, and very often the Luvos is extremely beneficial for people dealing with die-off symptoms. So these are just some examples of the common herbs that can be used on a regular basis, depending on what you're dealing with, of course. And in proper testing, to me, the proper testing is looking at a stool collection when you're talking about the different infections that you have in your gut. But with this, I'll mention the lab that I use. I use a lab called BioHealth. I use a test kit named it's the testing number. It's a 401H, H as in Henry. But it's a multiple day collection. That's what's important, regardless what company you're going with. The multiple day collections are important because very often people, let's say if you go to your conventional doctor and and maybe they're on top of it to the point where they're recognizing a stool collection would be good for you, and they take one stool sample, one quick little sample from one area of the stool, and then they send that in. Well, the chance that you're going to find what's going on in your gut by a one-day sample, and also just taking one sample from one area of that, it's not likely that you're going to really find out what's going on. So you want something that's a multiple day. This is the one that I use is a 3-day collection. And it's also important when you're doing a stool collection, you want to make sure that you get little tiny samples and specimens from all over that particular sample of stool. And you also, if most of your stool is well formed, and then one area looks like it's a little challenged, maybe it gets a little looser, or it's got a little bit of a coating on it, or a film on it, you want to get a sample from anything that looks different or challenging. Yeah, but the testing is such a key, because if you don't know what you're dealing with, you don't necessarily know what to use for it. So that's why that's so important, because it could be very different what would be recommended if you have a detrimental bacteria. And even from that standpoint, we mentioned earlier, like E. coli can also be in the kidney, bladder, or the urinary tract, or the Klebsiella can also be in the respiratory system. But that compared to H. pylori, which would generally be different, a parasite cleanse would be different, and so on. So that's why identifying what you have is such a key. And here's examples. You want to know your gut infection. And as an example of what we're looking at here, there's a lot of people who will think, oh, well, I probably have a gut infection. And then you'll go online and you'll find something that is recognized as a quality parasite cleanse. And you do the parasite cleanse, which is great. And if you have a general parasite, you're probably going to do yourself a world of good. But if you take a general parasite cleanse and you have an H. pylori infection, or you're dealing with yeast or candida, or you're dealing with the detrimental bacteria, and the list goes on, you're not really necessarily addressing what you're dealing with. And at the bottom on this, I wanted to actually put some note in here about SIBO, which is small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. And the reason why I haven't been talking about SIBO is I don't consider SIBO an infection. It's just misplaced bacteria in your gastrointestinal tract. It's bacteria that has migrated from the colon into the small intestine. So SIBO doesn't show up on a stool collection because it's not considered an infection. So that's usually, when people have SIBO, that's usually recognized by the most common form of testing is from a SIBO breath test. And then there's different things that you want to do once you've taken care of your infection. You want to then repair the gut lining. Things like L-glutamine, zinc, marshmallow extract, aloe vera extract, or even drinking the whole aloe vera juice itself. DGL, which is also the acronym for deglycerized licorice root, slippery elm extract, MSM, and even anti-inflammatory supplements all support repairing the gut lining, which is essential once you've actually done what you need to do to get rid of the parasite itself. And that brings us to usually the best part of the webinar, is the question and answer segment, because this is where I get to address what's important to you, and often where the little tidbits of information come out for all of us. So I welcome any of the questions that Paula has to share with me today.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Glenn. Yes, I'm fielding things here. So a couple things. Thank you for this. It's very thorough and really well put together. First thing that came to note on our radar here is parasites in the United States, unheard of, impossible. So I'm glad that you clarified that. I've been informing people for a few decades about this, and they're always shocked. So one of the things in terms of parasites, have you been able to see them directly in the stool? You talked about biofilm breaking down, but have you been able to see a worm, a fluke, some kind of evidence of a parasite in a stool without magnification?
Yes, I have. I've not in my own stool, but I've actually seen. And it sounds, to other people this might sound a little disturbing. It's not to me because of what I do, but with some regularity have clients that will send me pictures of their stool, and yes, I actually have seen the physical specimens in the stool from a picture, not just a lack of magnification, just from me getting a shot from a smartphone.
Yeah, yes, it is possible. And another point about liver flukes and how they're contracted, various food sources, raw walnuts are a common source of liver flukes. So for years, I've been slightly toasting mine, never eating them raw.
Yes, and the liver flukes they're the tough ones too, and they're very difficult to, like, a liver fluke isn't going to show up in a stool collection. You know, the fluke would have to be in the GI specifically, and very often I find that techniques such as muscle testing are the best for understanding liver flukes, and there are some conventional tests for liver flukes, but they're far too often there's false negatives where you feel that, no, I don't have this. I had one person who it was discovered through muscle testing that somebody else had done that they had liver flukes, but they wanted a recognition. There's a company, sorry, I don't remember the company's name right now. I believe they're in Arizona, who has a liver fluke test, except it took him like 6 or 7 tests to confirm the liver fluke. So they're not easy to find, but very tough to deal with. You know, very often when you have liver flukes, it's about a 6 to 9 month process of eliminating those.
Yeah, and one of the things I think that's maybe helpful to point out is that with all of these parasite worms, flukes, and bacteria, they have their own life cycle. So
Right.
like us, they eat and defecate, and that all of their debris, everything that they cast off, stays inside us unless we have very good digestive evacuation and eliminatory and detoxification pathways in place.
Yeah, and,
So
and I'm
getting
glad.
early in there.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up too, because that's one of the best things that we can do is make sure we're maintaining, at least 2 healthy bowel movements per day. But it becomes a bit of that oxymoron because generally people, if they're dealing with infections, they don't have quality bowel movements throughout the day to begin with. Yeah, so right. It's again another chicken or the egg story.
And it's all relative what a healthy bowel movement is, or a healthy diet. The first question we ask our clients often in coming in, one of the first sets is, what is their diet? Oh, I eat a great diet. I eat great. There's nothing wrong with what I eat, or how I eat, or when I eat. It's their perception. And
right.
so I think it's the same with I never just ask, how's your bowels? Oh, great. You have any problems? Nope. I go right to is, how many bowel movements do you have? How frequent are you? And so then when they say, oh, every Saturday, it's kind
right.
of a heads up,
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
But that's their normal, and so unless they are very aware of what a healthy bowel movement is, they might not. But I want to bring us back to roundworms, and
yes.
my point about these things having life cycles is part of their cycle is the cyst, and you refer to the roundworm cysts in joints. So roundworms have been eradicated from the gut in some way, but still have cysts. Any of these could have cyst forms still in other parts of our body. So are you aware of how to test for cysts in joints? Is it possible to test bodily fluids?
The only way that, and it doesn't mean there aren't other ways, but the way that we've been able to recognize that in our center is with muscle testing. And we found a pretty high success rate with applied kinesiology with that, or there's other forms that are being taught. But I am not aware of other ways to successfully, pick up the cysts that would be in joints.
And a question came up about walking barefoot and getting an infection that way. Are you suggesting that it's possible that something could just attach themselves to our foot and crawl up us and get in an opening, or do they need an opening in the foot like a cut, some little avenue so that there's the infective agent to blood transmission?
Yes, and it can just get in through the foot. I mean, having a cut on your foot, an open wound, would actually increase the likelihood. But because we're talking about microscopic, most of these are very microscopic, and they can actually easily get into the pores in the bottom of the foot. And the foot is a very absorptive area of the body. Very often people would put essential oils and such on their feet because of the delivery system through the feet. Yeah, so yes, it could just be walking. And if we think about it, and again, I love walking barefoot, but I'm going to also pay attention to, if I've been walking barefoot, I'm going to clean the bottom of my feet after that. And also the other things that we're all talking about here today is just keeping the adrenals healthy, the immune system healthy, because if you do contract an infection, the body should be able to deal with it properly.
Yeah. Yeah, if the immune system's strong, all the systems are in place, we should. And one of the effective agents you haven't mentioned, but is a 10-part webinar series on its own, is Lyme.
You're right. Oh yes, that's yeah. We could do a webinar a month on Lyme and all the co-infections, and it's it's true. Like even myself, I think this was about a year ago, I had a post on my website where I had a Bartonella infection, which is a common co-infection with Lyme, and I had that in my big toe, and it created a level of pain that I couldn't put any pressure on my big toe, and that was just one of those examples of where you can how these infections can affect the joints and other areas of the body.
Right. So you mentioned that you use BioHealth as the go-to lab for your clinic, and reference the number 401H, I believe. Is that in terms of name of the test? Is it a comprehensive stool and parasite test?
Yes, it is. It's different than, there's other companies out there. Obviously, Genova has some good tests, and to me, it's not as much like some people love to do the tests that give you, the representation of all the different bacteria levels and breakdown of fat and so on, like is common with the Genova testing. What I love about BioHealth is that the difference is also within the labs. Like as an example, Blastocystis hominis is a very difficult protozoal parasite to actually find. But it's the quality of who's actually, because everybody, when these kits go in, they're actually assessed by human beings, and so there could be a variance just based on testing companies and the experts actually doing all of this, and that's the main reason why I really like BioHealth from that perspective. But yeah, there's other labs that will be of quality also.
Right. No, I agree. There's time for a more broader test, and sometimes you just, maybe you've got that information already. You need to just go right to. It's like what bugs are we dealing with here?
Exactly.
Right, thank you. All right. So other questions here in terms of how to address this. You're suggesting to first handle the infection and then go about repairing the gut lining. Is that correct?
That is correct. You can do it simultaneously, but generally that could be overwhelming to any individual, because you're generally doing so much supplementation and get rid of it that it might be overwhelming from an emotional standpoint or even from a financial standpoint. So I generally tend to separate those.
Right, and to me it just doesn't make sense. You're very specifically addressing to eradicate. And until you have, it's hard to go about repairing something when there's still an active infection taking place.
That is correct.
So when doing a gut healing protocol, is there a certain point when you incorporate a probiotic?
Well, depending on if we're dealing with a detrimental bacteria, I incorporate a probiotic right away. And I do that because, as we're helping the body, we're basically, with the supplements, we're helping the immune system overcome the detrimental bacteria. But at the same time, we're increasing the beneficial bacteria. And when it hits the tipping point, where now the beneficial bacteria is outnumbering the detrimental, and since, as I mentioned in there, they're all fighting for the same food source, now even your good bacteria can start choking out the bad bacteria.
Yes. You know, and back us up just a little bit, because you also mentioned about sometimes anti-inflammatories help heal the gut. It
Hmm.
was one of the last things
Hmm.
on your list. And to me, that raised a flag. It's like anti-inflammatories, aren't those gut rippers? Those are the things that wreck us. But perhaps you're referring less to NSAIDs and more substances like turmeric or cumin.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because like in my mind when I say anti-inflammatories, I'm not thinking of things like NSAIDs, but yes, things like turmeric, curcumin. There's many different, really quality natural supplements that can actually have a anti-inflammatory effect. Even some specially coded enzymes. There's, I think, even the cerulase that I
Yeah.
mentioned, for helping break down the biofilm.
Yes.
That also has an anti-inflammatory effect. So,
Yes.
yes, thank you for clarifying that because I would not want to create that misconception.
Good. And one other thing on that same slide, in terms of common herbs and supplements, you mentioned grapeseed extract. And
Mhm.
did you actually mean grapefruit seed extract?
I did.
Okay. Note that,
Did it?
everybody.
Did I have a typo there?
Well, it's just grapeseed. And it's like, well, we
Oh,
use grapeseed oil. I don't really know if we want that
yeah.
in terms of a.
No, I did mean to have grapefruit seed extract on there. Yes, and I'll since you mentioned that, let me make another note with that. Is when we're dealing with the yeast spores, taking grapefruit seed extract like one every hour when you're dealing with a yeast infection really helps to eradicate the spores in a relatively short period of time.
Mhm. All right, good point on that. So, question is how to know when the parasites are gone. Do you retest, or you just go by symptoms or questionnaires? What do you do, Glenn?
It depends. It's really on an individual client by client basis. If we had a collection of symptoms when we first did the test, and then we go, and I typically run, and the general length of time that I'm working on some in gut infection is typically 2 months. Unless there's multiple, I might work on it for anywhere from 3 to 6 months if there's multiple. And when we reach the end of it, I'm just going back over their symptoms that they're experiencing. And if we recognize that all or most of their symptoms are gone, we don't retest.
Yeah.
But if they're still symptomatic, we'll retest. Or if it's multiple infections, I'll still retest because there might be times where you go down the proper route of supporting the immune system and get rid of, like gave the example of this gentleman with the four pathogens. I'm, regardless of how he feels, I'm still going to recommend retesting because there were 4 pathogens. And I
Yeah.
had that with somebody else recently where they initially had 3, and then we retested and 2 of them were gone, but they still were dealing with one of those infections. So.
Mhm. Mhm. And for me, my approach is knowing that these things have their own cycles from cyst
Mhm.
form to adult form, and that they can burrow in and have biofilms. They can burrow into tissues. And so they're good escape artists. They see
Mhm.
antibiotics coming. They say, "Run! I'm going to hide in the tissues," and then the whole course of antibiotics moves through, and they say, "Hey, coast is clear." They come back out. So one of the things that I've done is approach this with protocol is in cycles. So it's for some period on and then off, and it allows particularly parasites and bacteria that are in other lining to come back out and get in the circulation, either in the gut or somewhere in the intestinal tract, and rather than just staying relentlessly on it for 2 to 6 months, is to break it up into cycles and see if symptoms start to reduce and come back a little bit. And so we know that we're addressing it, we're finding it, but I think that we're more likely, certainly in my thinking, my logic is that we're more likely to get it all, or as much as we can, for the immune system to take over on its own again, by breaking it up in cycles like that.
Yeah, and I'll even add to that is, very often when we're doing something a little bit longer term, I won't stick with the same supplement either.
Hmm.
Whereas, if I'm working on, let's say a detrimental, something like the Citrobacter mentioned, which could be a nasty little bacteria to get rid of, I might use something for 1 month and then switch it out to a whole different product. just to come at it from a different level of recognition. And I'm glad you brought that up too, Paula, because what most people don't think about is, the bacteria and these infections. I mean, they're on a level, they're no different than us. They're just trying to survive.
Yes.
Yeah, and what would we do if something was attacking us? We would do everything within our power to hide or defend ourselves. And they're the same way. They're really doing the same thing.
Right. Good point. It's the game of hide and seek. And that brings us back to biofilms and this protective covering that they put on, this like super coat that they burrow in and make their plans of how they're going to come get us. So the question is, what's your best protocol to break down biofilm?
Well, the best thing that I've found to use is the cerulase. And there's other different supplements that contain the serratia peptidase. So that's, to me, is the key ingredient that we're looking for. And I've seen a high level of success with that. And it's really been a big, once there was the recognition of the biofilm, which is relatively new in this industry for us to recognize that. But since adding that into the protocols when I have clients dealing with detrimental bacteria, it's really been extremely helpful. And I think even if somebody chooses a route of antibiotics, I would still say it's still essential to break down the biofilm, because the antibiotic will not.
All right, good point. There's some homeopathic formulas, herbal formulas that have been put together by Byron White. WHYTE, I believe, and one of them is known as AI, and these were designed largely to address Lyme infections, but they're not limited to. And so you can search it on the web. I'm sorry, it's just coming to me now, so I don't have the backup information to support this. But Gordon Medical, Gordon, out of Santa Rosa, you'll find Byron White's formulas and information about that. If somebody's interested. Okay, next question, Glenn. Do you consider that spirit-soul-body balance is the greatest remedy, immune system power, and defense to any bacteria, parasite infection that humans may deal with?
Well, that's a great comment, and I don't even call it a question. Just what's going on our level energetically, whether we want to call it vibrational or spiritually, I think is really going to be at the core of everything, whether something is going on well or maybe not so well. And shifting that, I think, plays a big role. The only thing that I caution is sometimes if we get so deep in just that world and thinking that's the only thing we need to do, that's a big part of my centers. We incorporate what's going on mentally, emotionally, energetically, as well as what's going on physiologically. And I think that's the best way to go about it. But yeah, if you want to overcome something with anything, I don't care if it's a gut infection or anything else, what's going on with the mind and the soul is really something that's key across the board.
Yeah, I personally practice mindfulness meditation and teach it and encourage my clients and friends to utilize it as well, of just a powerful tool for staying in balance, for really supporting my mind, my emotions, and therefore my immune system. So I'm better off with it than just trying to override it and say I'm going to take this bucket of pills to get myself out of something.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more.
So the question is, oftentimes we're given a supportive gut protocol, including diet and supplements, without testing, but simply from the using of questionnaires. And they're wondering if this is causing more harm than good if there is an underlying infection. I guess what's coming from the questionnaires is not going to, what I'm reading from this question is that you might identify that there's a possible infection, but not necessarily the specific infection from the questionnaire, right?
Exactly. And questionnaires are great to help understand if an infection is likely. But to me, from there, you want to know what it is. because and I think that's one of the, because a lot of these things will just occur online, and I get it. I offer online questionnaires myself, but like as an example, a questionnaire that would tell me if there's a gut issue, well, that might make, I might be looking at food sensitivity, I may be looking at infections. Like there's a lot of different things that would cause gut problems. So that's where I think questionnaires are great tools, but don't use it as an end-all diagnostic.
Yes. And to that end, I would say the same for muscle testing. That it's a great tool to have if you're really competent at it. And I have to say, there's a lot of people that aren't, that are doing it, just as in, many things in many professions. So I'm not dissing muscle testing at all. I'm just saying it's an art form.
Well,
and it's not something that I rely on solely.
No, and I agree. Like I've purposely chosen to never learn muscle testing because I feel that is an art, that it's something that you have to become good at over time, and even have a certain level or like a certain personality for it to be really effective. Also, you have to be this person who is completely open to any possibility without directing your own energy. And
Exactly.
And with the clients in our center, we do stool testing and we also do muscle testing. And I, because there is no one, this is the one thing to clear up, and I'm glad this said organically grown there out of this conversation, is
Yes.
stool testing is an absolute. Muscle testing is an absolute. There's no one single way to have 100% accuracy of what you're dealing with. So, I love the stool testing, and when done properly, it can give you a high result factor. But anything that you can incorporate to take that to another level, I think, is always an advantage.
Yes. So it comes, follow up on this is, as far as muscle testing, is there a course that you can recommend to us? It's an interesting modality to add to our toolbox, but Lucy's saying that she's taken one, but she didn't feel it's credible. Yeah, that's a great point, Lucy, because they often aren't, but if Glenn has a recommendation.
Well, I know, the system of the name has lost me right now. Gentleman in the Northwest has a system, the ART. And I can't, right now his name has Dr. Klinghardt.
Yes.
So Dr. Klinghardt, when I used to be a part of Dr. Joseph Mercola's clinic in Chicago, when I lived there before moving to California, he all of the people who did muscle testing were all trained through Klinghardt's system of ART, and it was a fantastic system. But I also applied kinesiology. Yeah, and to me, it's always, the way I look at muscle testing, you learn from the expert, but it's like anything. You have to practice it. It has to be something that you build your skill and your art over time. And but yes, having a credible system that you're first learning is obviously very important.
Okay. Just a second here. I need to get this. Okay. Back to biohealth. You're using biohealth for a reason. It's my understanding that our graduates can use biohealth and can order tests directly from there, that there's a doctor on staff that will do the interpretation of the test, so we're not diagnosing and treating, standing outside of our scope of practice.
Correct.
But that is available. Is that your understanding?
I don't require that, but I do know that, like as an example, I believe that to be true because basically the SIBO breath testing, like I can't carry that test kit in my office. When I'm actually recommending the SIBO breath test, it actually be shipped from biohealth because of those parameters. So I would assume that would be the case, but I can't say 100% right now. Easily checked in though.
Absolutely. Lucy will confirm it tomorrow, okay?
Okay.
Can too. So before I forget, since I've already clicked this away once, and thank you, Alex, for bringing it back, is cryptosporidium self-limiting, or do they need to be treated?
Definitely need to be treated. And this is one where I add in, I didn't have this on the list because I don't run into cryptosporidium often, maybe a couple times a year. Along with a typical parasite protocol, I also add in something called AP Mag. Can't remember the name of the company who makes it, but the supplement is called AP Mag, and it really helps. The AP Mag, I feel, helps get into that interior lining of the small intestine to deal with it properly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And, the question keeps coming back, when do you retest? It's like, when? Based on symptoms, based on complexity of science?
Well, I would say that if, and the parameters I think are important too. I think a lot of practitioners, they do cleanses for infections that will typically last 30 days. And I just feel that is not enough. I'd say minimum of 2 months, sometimes 3 months. And then if there's multiple pathogens, it can be much longer. And once you've understand what's going on and you're going to help support the body's immune system in actually eradicating this, and you have the defined beginning and end time of how long that process is going to be. Again, if the symptoms aren't gone, you retest then, because you want to confirm that you've addressed the pathogen properly. And then if the pathogen is now shown to be gone, it gives you then an indicator, well, there's other deeper levels we may look. Sometimes there's levels of toxicity that we're just not aware of, and so on. So, but yes, once you have the defined time frame, and if there's still symptom issues, then I would definitely retest at that time.
Okay. So follow up on this, here at Hawthorn, students are taught to use questionnaires because that's the assessment tool that we have available to us. Few companies like BioHealth that I think are available. But Lucy's saying she starts immediately with a diet and gut healing protocol, but that Dr. Depke has clarified that a client can have underlying infections that are ongoing for years and not know that there's an infection. So, but certain questionnaires are going to pinpoint that there's an issue. For me, a questionnaire is a good way to start.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gathering subjective information from the client's perspective, their point of view of how challenged they are or not by something. And so if the symptoms and the way that they're presenting the information that they share and the questionnaires reveal something, I'll proceed with testing as opposed to just testing first. But what she's saying is like, is she understanding that the best way to confirm an infection is with testing? And that it sounds like everyone should be tested since we're all exposed anyway every day?
Well, I don't necessarily agree with that, just from the perspective of that. If I feel that I'm exposed as much as anybody else is, and maybe even more with some of the different raw food choices I might make, and so on. But from that perspective, I don't feel like the regular testing is necessary, because my body is in a level that I'm very confident, and I can almost tell, like intuitively and even physically, I can almost tell when I will be exposed to something. But I can watch the process of my body actually doing what it needs to do to eliminate it, and then see the difference. Like I can see the difference in the change in bowel movements if I'm exposed to a pathogen, where they'll go from normal to loose to then almost like a little bit of a, not constipated, but just tougher to move. But then once I go through the healing crisis, I'm right back to how everything would normally and easily move. And so it's, when the body is working well, we don't have to be as concerned with that. But I will say, as a back end of that, about every maybe 2 or 3 years, I just do a stool collection kit just in case.
Yes.
Because what if I don't, because I would rather, if I'm not going to be significantly symptomatic for 10 plus years, well, if I do one every 3 years just in case, and I've had some come back where they've they've been completely clear and nothing shows up. But I've also, I remember one did, and again, it was just tied into my routine check, and I had Klebsiella and a different bacteria at the same time. So I was glad to see that, rather than developing Klebsiella pneumonia or having all these other issues. So
sure.
So hopefully that clarifies.
It does, and I think that the main point here is that we're all exposed, and we have systems in place for this. It's the immune system primarily, from head to toe. We have an immune system. When it's functioning well, and then all the other systems have to be as well. Our hormonal system, the endocrine, our adrenals, our detoxification, that all needs to be in place. Many of us will harbor an infection. We might even be carriers, but have no symptoms because our immune system is keeping it in check. It's living symbiotically, right? That's right. We're living symbiotically with the rest of our healthy bacteria and everything else in our body. It's when people start to get sick and they're not doing well that this becomes more of an issue. It also is an issue if somebody harbors an infection as a carrier. You talked about H. pylori being one of them that's easy to transmit through saliva, sharing water bottles, kissing, etc. That's a concern. Knowing that you're a possible carrier and you can transmit is important. But do you need to treat it? Not necessarily if your body's already doing that for you.
Right.
But that's my perspective, and I'm not presenting, so sorry.
Well, no, it's that's part of the reality of it. And again, but it really ties into is for everybody just really just to be very candid and honest with yourself. I mean, is your body really where it needs to be? Are your adrenals healthy? Is your immune system healthy? As somebody had mentioned what's going on with the mind and the soul, because if we're walking around and somebody's a regular, like a walking stress ball who's dealing with all this suppressed emotions from traumas of the past, well, you would already know if you're stressed all the time, your immune system is not functioning well. So those are all the things to just be very candid with ourselves about, and just like you had mentioned, Paula, where you practice some mindfulness and some level of meditation, and I'm always doing something to make sure that I'm and I look at it from the word prosperity, which is not about money. Prosperity is about being able to have, like, the very core of the word is about having ease even through chaos.
Yes.
And I feel that those are the things that are important to recognize. If you could be at ease through everything that's going on in your life, even when chaos shows up, the chances that you have a healthier immune system are actually much higher.
Yes, and it's also trainable. We can train ourselves of how we react.
Yes, absolutely.
It's one of the things we have control of.
Right.
Control of. Can't control the chaos already, but how we respond to it, react to it, is very different.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Respond, not react. That's my motto.
Yeah.
All right, a couple other things here. We just have time for a few more questions and we'll wrap this. How do you know if there's biofilms?
Well, if somebody's dealing with a bacterial infection, you can pretty much know that there's going to be a biofilm that you're dealing with.
It's just the nature of them. Count on it, is what you're saying.
It's what they've figured out. They're pretty darn smart.
This is a question. Is there a supplement you can take if you feel you've been affected for a short course of clearing?
Well, one of the things that I always say is that some of the most common issues are, is tied into food poisoning, which is a bacterial infection. And so if you go out for dinner and you have loose stool or diarrhea, or you're immediately bloated after dinner, or it's just some type of a GI distress, I always just say, go home and take about 100 billion beneficial bacteria and then take another 100 billion before you go to bed. And very often, if that support can allow your body to knock it out easily and effectively, and it doesn't become a bigger problem later. I always, some of the things, one of the things I always have with me, I don't care if I'm at home or traveling or whatever, I always have, the probiotics with me. I always have a beneficial bacteria with me, and I'm always prepared for that, because again, the exposure is common.
Yes. Yes, so in general, support your immune system, keep your stress at bay, learn how to respond, not react. And yes, short courses can be effective, but it's also knowing what you're dealing with.
Right.
We can take, different products are going to address different things differently.
Right. Well, and along with that, if you went the route of using the higher dosing of probiotics in, just in case it was food poisoning and you had contracted this detrimental bacteria, well, if that doesn't, if you wake up the next morning and there's still issues, it was probably something other than a bacteria that you were exposed to.
Yeah. Have you ever used fasting or recommended it to eradicate parasites, bacteria, etc.?
I'm not really a big fan, and I say that just because we live in a very toxic world, and most of our bodies have a certain level of toxicity that the body is kind of battling with all the time. And when we fast, very often we just release too many of those toxins into the body, and it can actually exacerbate what we're trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not a typical recommendation of mine.
Mm-hmm. Mine either. Thank you. For similar reasons. What about coming back to biohealth? They accept insurance. I don't know about Medicaid for it, but they do accept insurance from. Yeah, and then it's a matter of if your insurance is going to pay for it. So
right, exactly, and that's even with my, I'm a cash practice, but we will provide a super bill for tests, and it's, sometimes they're covered and sometimes they're not. It's there's, to me there doesn't always seem to be any rhyme or reason, but some people do get these, and because biohealth is a licensed lab. I mean, it's
right.
Your conventional doctor, if they chose to, they could use that lab also.
Oh, I think there's a rhyme and reason. It's called "We don't want to pay."
Well, yeah. I was trying not to say that.
Okay, on that, I want to thank everybody for your questions and your comments. You made this very dynamic presentation, and I appreciate your participation a lot. And with that, I'm going to close our Q&A segment, and I've just got some closing comments. So if you hang with me just for a couple minutes, I appreciate that. I want to remind you that this webinar was recorded. It'll be available on our website in just a few days after James Bernardinelli does his wizardry with it. And so you'll have it at your fingertips, as well as Glen's PowerPoint to review again, and a wide variety of other topics from previous webinars as well. I want to encourage you that if you are interested in learning more about holistic health and nutrition, Hawthorn has some very great programs. Please check out our website, and if you'd like to go more in depth, you can always speak with our, get some personalized attention with Kathy McDermott. She's our Director of Admissions. Reminding you about the survey to fill out after the webinar ends and how much it helps us to have your feedback and your comments. So I pay attention to this. I hope you'll take a few minutes for that. And I'm inviting you to join us for our next webinar on Tuesday, April 18th with registered herbalist Rosalie de la Forêt on the topic of holistic perspectives for insulin resistance. Rosalie just has a fabulous book. The Alchemy of Herbs has just hit the bookshelves today. It's a fabulous book. I'm sure she'll be giving a copy of it away at that webinar, so join us for that. I'll start a few minutes early for some news and notes announcements, so you can join me for that too. And I think it'll be a great presentation to tune in for sure. Rosalie has a particular style and a point of view, and is a fabulous herbalist. So always has great presentations. And a reminder about our next All About Alumni is tomorrow at 12 noon Pacific time. And we've got our doctoral graduate, Vicki Stein, presenting on what she learned at Hawthorn and what she's been doing in her career post-graduation. So with that, it concludes our presentation. I want to thank you again, Glen, for showing up and being so generous with everything that you do for Hawthorn and all the information that you give so flowingly. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It means a lot to me. Thank you.
You bet. You bet. I want to thank everybody for joining us. I wish you all the best of health. I sure look forward to continuing to learning more together at Hawthorn's webinars and All About Alumni series. Take care, and remember, what you practice grows stronger, so be mindful of what you practice. Take care, everybody.